Mara didn't know that the man watching her from the shadowed corner booth was the most powerful Alpha King in the realm. She didn't know he'd been searching for his fated mate for 3 decades, growing colder and more distant with each passing year. And she certainly didn't know that her date's cruel abandonment was about to change everything. She sat frozen in the elegant restaurant chair, staring at the empty seat across from her where David had been just moments before. The wine glass he'd barely touched still held the imprint of his lips. The appetizer they'd ordered together grew cold on the pristine white tablecloth. "You're just not what I expected," he had said, his voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment she knew too well. "I thought you'd be more different." He'd stood then, straightening his expensive jacket with practiced indifference. "This was a mistake. Don't wait for me to come back." The words hit like physical blows, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. Mara's chest tightened as familiar shame crept up her throat. She should have known better, should have recognized the signs when he'd seemed surprised by her appearance at the door, when his smile had faltered just slightly upon seeing her in person. Around her, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and the gentle clink of silver against china. A server passed by, carefully avoiding eye contact, probably wondering if she was planning to order or if she was just another woman abandoned mid-meal. The thought made her stomach twist with fresh humiliation. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked among the silk dresses and diamond jewellery surrounding her. Her simple black dress felt cheap under the soft lighting, her carefully applied makeup insufficient to transform her into someone worthy of this place, someone worthy of staying for. The couple at the table beside her whispered behind raised menus, their eyes flicking toward her with the kind of pity that burned worse than outright cruelty. Mara closed her eyes, trying to shrink into herself, wishing she could disappear entirely. How could she have been so stupid? 3 months of texting, of late-night phone calls that made her believe maybe finally someone could see past everything that made her wrong. Past the mixed blood that her family never let her forget. Past the awkwardness that clung to her like a second skin. Her phone buzzed against the table. A text from David, because apparently his public humiliation hadn't been thorough enough. "Sorry, but you understand. I need someone who fits my world. Good luck." Mara's hands trembled as she set the phone face down. Good luck, as if she were a charity case who needed encouragement to find someone desperate enough to settle for her. The server appeared at her elbow, young and nervous, clearly drawing the short straw among the staff. "Miss, will you be ordering dinner this evening?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Will you be staying despite the obvious rejection? Will you pretend this didn't just happen? Will you compound your embarrassment by eating alone after being so publicly dismissed? Mara's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I should go." She reached for her purse with shaking fingers, her movements clumsy with mortification. The couples around her had stopped even pretending not to stare. This was dinner theatre for them, a cautionary tale about what happened when people reached too far above their station. Standing on unsteady legs, Mara fumbled for her wallet. She'd leave money for the appetizer, for the wine David had ordered and abandoned. She'd pay for the privilege of her own humiliation and then disappear into the night where she belonged. But as she pulled out her credit card, the thin piece of plastic slipped from her nervous fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp ping that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet restaurant. Mara stared at the card lying near her feet, her cheeks burning with fresh shame. Even leaving couldn't be done gracefully. Even her exit had to be fumbling and pathetic, providing one final moment of entertainment for the watching diners. This was her life. This was who she was. Someone who got stood up. Someone who dropped things. Someone who didn't belong in places like this or with men like David. She bent to retrieve the card, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of all these witnesses to her failure. The weight of a dozen stares pressed down on her shoulders as she straightened, card clutched in her white-knuckled grip. In a few minutes she'd be outside in the cool night air. She'd call a taxi and go home to her small apartment where no one could see her fall apart. But first she had to walk past all these tables, past all these people who now had a story to tell about the girl who got abandoned at Romano's, who couldn't even pick up her credit card without making a scene. Mara took a deep breath and lifted her chin. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived this too. She just had to make it to the door. The hand that appeared in front of her was large, elegant, and absolutely steady. Mara blinked through her blur of tears, following the strong wrist up to a forearm corded with muscle beneath expensive black fabric. Her gaze travelled higher, past broad shoulders that seemed to fill her entire field of vision, until she found herself staring into eyes the colour of molten amber. Everything in the restaurant had gone completely silent. The man standing beside her table radiated power like heat from a forge. He was tall enough that she had to crane her neck to meet his gaze, and something about the way he held himself made the air around him seem to thrum with barely contained energy. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in marble museums, all sharp angles and classical lines that spoke of old bloodlines and older authority. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. They weren't just looking at her. They were seeing her, with an intensity that made her feel exposed and treasured all at once. "Your credit card," he said, his voice low and rich with an accent she couldn't place. Without breaking eye contact, he bent gracefully and retrieved the fallen plastic, holding it out to her with fingers that didn't so much as tremble. Mara stared at the offered card, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This man, this devastatingly beautiful, obviously powerful man, was helping her, in front of everyone, after what had just happened. She reached for the card with shaking fingers, and the moment her skin brushed his, heat shot up her arm like lightning. Something in her chest pulled tight, a golden thread of warmth she'd never felt before unwinding behind her ribs. His pupils dilated slightly, and she wondered if he'd felt it too. That impossible connection, that sense of recognition that made no logical sense. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, but instead of stepping away, he moved closer. With deliberate precision, he pulled out the chair David had abandoned and settled into it as if he belonged there, as if he'd always belonged there. The restaurant seemed to collectively hold its breath. "His mistake," he said simply, and those two words carried such quiet authority that Mara felt something shift in her chest. The shame that had been eating her alive moments before flickered, overwhelmed by confusion and something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'm sorry," she said, sinking back into her chair because her legs had suddenly forgotten how to hold her upright. "The man who left." His gaze never wavered from her face, as if she were the only person in the room worth looking at. His mistake. Around them, Mara could hear the whispers starting. Not the pitying murmurs from before, but something else entirely. Excitement, shock, recognition. Who was this man that his mere presence could transform her humiliation into something else? Someone important enough that the servers were suddenly standing straighter, that the manager was approaching their table with the kind of deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Sir," the manager said, his voice carefully controlled but tinged with something that might have been panic. "We weren't expecting you this evening. If you'd like, we can prepare your usual table." "This table is perfect," the stranger said, without looking away from Mara. His tone was pleasant, conversational, and absolutely final. "We'll need a few minutes to look at the menu." The manager bowed, actually bowed, and retreated so quickly he nearly knocked over a water glass. Mara stared across the table at this impossibly compelling man who had just claimed ownership of her disaster. "You don't understand," she said, her voice gaining strength as reality began to reassert itself. "I was just leaving. I don't belong here." Something flickered in those amber eyes. Not pity, but something fiercer, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Where do you belong?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. The movement brought with it the scent of cedar and winter air, something wild and clean that made her think of forests and running water. The question caught her off guard. Where did she belong? Certainly not in places like this, surrounded by crystal and china and people who looked at her like she was a curiosity. Not with men who could afford appetizers that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. She fumbled for an answer that wouldn't sound pathetic. Somewhere else, somewhere more appropriate. Appropriate for whom? The way he said it made her look up sharply. There was steel beneath the silk of his voice, a challenge that made her spine straighten despite herself. "For someone like me," she said, lifting her chin even as heat flooded her cheeks. "Someone who doesn't fit in places like this." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through to her soul. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but no less commanding. "What's your name?" "Mara," she said before she could think better of it. Mara. The way he said her name made it sound like something precious, like something worth keeping. Excuse me." The interruption came from a woman at the neighbouring table, her face flushed with wine and excitement. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but aren't you—" "Busy," he finished smoothly, his gaze never leaving Mara's face. "Perhaps another time." The woman's face went pale, and she retreated to her table with stammering apologies. But not before Mara caught the way she whispered urgently to her companion, the way they both turned to stare with wide eyes and barely contained awe. "Who are you?" Mara asked, her voice small but determined. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face, made him look less like a marble statue and more like something warm and real and impossibly appealing. "Someone who knows a thing or two about not belonging," he said, "and someone who would very much like to have dinner with you, if you'll let me." The golden thread in her chest pulled tighter, and Mara found herself leaning forward despite every instinct telling her to run. This was dangerous. This man, whoever he was dangerous in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. But when he looked at her like that, like she was someone worth staying for, someone worth choosing, she found it difficult to remember why danger was something to be avoided. "I should warn you," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm apparently not what people expect." His smile widened, and she caught a glimpse of something predatory in it. Something that should have frightened her, but instead sent heat curling through her veins. "Good," he said, signalling the server with a subtle gesture that had the young man appearing at their table immediately. "I've always found expectations to be overrated." The days that followed were a whirlwind of coffee dates and evening walks, of conversations that stretched long into the night and moments when Mara caught herself forgetting to breathe. He called himself Adrian, and he had a way of listening that made her feel like her words mattered, like her thoughts were worth holding on to. But there were things about him that didn't add up. The way servers and shopkeepers stammered around him, the deference in people's voices when they spoke to him, the expensive car that appeared whenever he needed it, driven by someone who called him Sir with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty. "You're not just wealthy, are you?" Mara asked on their fifth evening together as they sat on a bench overlooking the city lights. She'd been working up the courage to voice her suspicions all week. Adrian went very still beside her, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. In the golden glow of the street lamp, his profile looked carved from stone. "What makes you say that?" "The way people look at you, like you're—" She struggled for the right words. "Like you're someone important, really important." He set down his cup with careful precision and turned to face her. Those amber eyes that had haunted her dreams searched her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Would it matter if I were?" The question hung between them, like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Would it matter? Everything about this week had felt like borrowed time, like a beautiful dream she'd have to wake up from eventually. If he really was someone important, someone with power and influence and a world she could never hope to understand, then the dream was over before it had truly begun. "I'm nobody, Adrian," she whispered, the truth scraping her throat raw. "I work at a library. I live in a studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling. I buy my clothes from discount stores, and my family thinks I'm—" "Your family thinks what?" The steel in his voice made her look up sharply. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists on his thighs. "It doesn't matter," she said quickly. "It matters to me." The way he said it, like her pain was his pain, like her wounds were worth defending, made something crack open in her chest. She'd never had anyone speak about her with such fierce protectiveness. Never had someone make her feel like she was worth protecting at all. "They think I'm a disappointment," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "My blood isn't pure enough. My abilities aren't strong enough. I'm not enough of anything to matter." Adrian's eyes flashed gold, actual gold, and for a moment Mara could have sworn she saw something wild and predatory flicker across his face. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the leashed power beneath it. "Your family is wrong. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." He reached for her hands, his fingers warm and steady against her trembling ones. "I understand what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. I understand what it's like to feel like you don't fit anywhere." She stared at him, seeing something vulnerable flicker behind his composed mask. "You? But you're so— alone," he finished quietly. "I've been alone for a very long time, Mara." The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way that made her heart ache. This beautiful, powerful man, lonely. It seemed impossible, but she could see the truth of it in his eyes. "How long?" she asked. 34 years, since I was old enough to understand what I was missing." "What are you missing?" He lifted their joined hands, pressing her knuckles to his lips with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Someone to come home to, someone who sees me, not what I represent." The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, singing with recognition and longing. She was falling for him, had been falling since that first moment in the restaurant. But this felt bigger than falling. This felt like flying. "Adrian," she whispered. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist. "About who I am." Before she could ask what he meant, her phone rang. The harsh sound shattered the intimate bubble they'd created, and Mara's stomach dropped when she saw the caller ID. "I'm sorry, I have to—" "Mara!" Her sister's voice was sharp with malicious glee. "I just saw the most interesting photos, you and some man looking very cosy." Mara's blood went cold. Rebecca had a talent for making even good news sound like a weapon. "What photos?" "From Romano's, from that little cafe on 5th Street, from the park where you've been playing house with some rich boy." Rebecca's laugh was cruel and familiar. "Did you really think this was going to last? Did you really think someone like that would want someone like you?" "Rebecca, he's slumming, sweetheart. Rich men do that sometimes. They find some pathetic little nobody to play with until they get bored." Adrian's hand tightened on hers, and she realized he could hear every word. Humiliation flooded her cheeks, hot and suffocating. "And when he does get bored," Rebecca continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "when he realizes what you really are, he'll dump you just like David did. Except this time, everyone will know about it. Everyone will know you tried to reach above your station and fell flat on your—" The phone went silent. Mara looked down to see Adrian holding it, his finger on the end call button. His face was carved from granite, his eyes blazing with barely contained fury. "Give me your sister's address," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Adrian, no, she's not worth it." She is never to speak to you that way again." Each word was precisely enunciated, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Do you understand me?" Mara stared at him, seeing something magnificent and terrible in his face. This was not the gentleman who brought her coffee and listened to her ramble about books. This was someone else entirely, someone with the kind of power that could reshape lives with a word. "Who are you?" she whispered. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still stroking her wrist like he was trying to memorize the feel of her skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but unwavering. "I'm the Alpha King, Mara. I'm the one person in this realm your sister should never have threatened." The words hit her like a physical blow. Alpha King. The Alpha King. The most powerful shifter in existence. The one who ruled all the packs, who commanded armies and controlled territories that spanned continents. And he'd been having coffee dates with her, listening to her talk about library cataloguing systems and her favourite books. "I can't," she said, pulling her hands free and standing on shaky legs. "I can't do this. You're everything I've been looking for," he said, rising to face her. "You're my mate, Mara, the other half of my soul." The golden thread in her chest blazed to life, confirming what she'd been afraid to believe. But instead of joy, all she felt was terror. "I'm nobody," she said, backing away from him. "I'm nobody, and you're the king, and this is insane." "You're not nobody to me." "I can't trust this," she said, the words scraping her throat raw. "I can't trust you. This is too much, too fast, too impossible." Pain flickered across his face, but he didn't follow when she took another step back. "I won't force you," he said quietly. "I won't chase you if you run. But I need you to know what your sister said, what anyone says about your worth. It's all lies. You're precious, Mara. You're rare and beautiful and exactly what I need." Tears blurred her vision as she shook her head. "I need time. I need to think." He nodded, though she could see it cost him. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." "And if I'm never ready?" The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment she saw the Alpha King stripped bare, just a man who'd found his mate and was terrified of losing her. "Then I'll spend eternity hoping you change your mind." 3 days became 5, became 7, and still Mara couldn't bring herself to answer Adrian's calls. His voicemail sat in her phone like unopened letters, each one a gentle reminder that he was waiting, that he'd meant what he said about giving her time. But time wasn't making this easier. If anything, the distance was making her realise how empty her life felt without him in it. She threw herself into work, staying late at the library, reorganising sections that didn't need reorganising. Anything to avoid going home to her empty apartment, where she'd sit staring at her phone, thumb hovering over his contact name. It was on the 8th day that her carefully constructed avoidance crumbled. She was shelving returns in the history section when she heard familiar laughter from the front desk. Cruel, bright laughter that made her stomach clench with dread. "Excuse me," Rebecca's voice carried across the silent library like a blade. "I'm looking for my sister, the pathetic one who works here." Mara closed her eyes, her hands gripping the book she'd been holding hard enough to leave fingerprints on the cover. She'd known this was coming, had known Rebecca wouldn't be satisfied with just the phone call. "Rebecca," she said, stepping around the corner, "what are you doing here?" Her sister stood at the circulation desk, wearing designer clothes and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. Behind her stood 2 other women Mara recognised from family gatherings, cousins who'd never bothered to learn her name, but had always been eager to watch her fail. "We were in the neighbourhood," Rebecca said, her voice honey-sweet and venomous. "Thought we'd check on you, see how you're holding up after your little fantasy ended." "What fantasy?" "Oh, please." Rebecca's laugh was pitched to carry, drawing stares from the few patrons scattered throughout the library. "The Alpha King, Mara? Really? Did you honestly think we wouldn't find out who you've been embarrassing yourself with?" Heat flooded Mara's cheeks. "Keep your voice down. This is a library." "This is a reality check." Rebecca moved closer, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown. Did you really think someone like him would want someone like you? Someone with tainted blood? Someone who can barely shift properly? Stop, Mara whispered. Someone whose own family is ashamed of her? Rebecca, please! He was playing with you, sweetheart. Rich, powerful men do that sometimes. They find some desperate little nobody to amuse themselves with until something better comes along. Each word was a carefully aimed arrow, finding its mark with devastating precision. Mara felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller under the weight of her sister's cruelty. And now that he's had his fun, Rebecca continued, circling like a predator, now that he's seen what you really are, he's probably already moved on to someone worthy, someone pure, someone who belongs in his world. That's enough. The voice came from behind Mara, low and deadly, and filled with barely restrained fury. She spun around to see Adrian standing at the library entrance, his presence filling the space like gathering thunder. But this wasn't the gentle man who'd brought her coffee. This was the Alpha King, power radiating from every line of his body, his eyes blazing with gold that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Rebecca's face went white, then red, then white again. "Your Majesty," she stammered, dropping into a curtsy that looked more like a stumble. "I didn't know. We weren't aware." "You weren't aware that I could hear every poisonous word?" Adrian's voice was silk over steel as he moved past Mara to stand directly in front of Rebecca. "You weren't aware that insulting my mate is insulting me?" "Your mate?" one of the cousins squeaked. "Mine," Adrian said, his gaze never leaving Rebecca's terrified face. "The woman you just called worthless, the woman you just told wasn't good enough." He smiled, and it was a beautiful, terrible thing. "Would you like to repeat those opinions to my face?" I was just—" Rebecca's usual composure cracked completely. "I didn't mean—" "You meant every word." Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "And now you're going to leave, all of you. You're going to walk out of here and never speak to Mara again. You're going to tell your family that she is under my protection, and anyone who treats her with anything less than respect will answer to me personally." "But she's—" "Everything." The word cracked like a whip. "She is everything to me, and if I hear that you've so much as looked at her wrong, I will strip your family of every privilege, every protection, every alliance you've ever enjoyed. Do I make myself clear?" Rebecca nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Now you do." Adrian's dismissal was absolute. "Leave." They fled, actually fled, stumbling over each other in their haste to escape his presence. Rebecca cast one last terrified glance over her shoulder before disappearing through the library doors. In the sudden silence that followed, Mara became aware of the other patrons staring with wide eyes and dropped jaws. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for romance novels, was clutching her chest like she might faint. "I'm sorry," Adrian said, turning to address the room. "For the disturbance. Please, continue with your reading." And just like that, the spell broke. People returned to their books with the kind of intense focus that suggested they were desperately trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed the Alpha King defending a small-town librarian. Adrian turned back to Mara, and she saw the exact moment he transformed from terrifying sovereign back into the man who'd held her hand so gently. The gold faded from his eyes, replaced by concern so deep it made her chest ache. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Mara stared at him, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. He'd come for her. He'd defended her with the kind of fierce protectiveness she'd only dreamed of. He'd called her his mate in front of witnesses, claimed her publicly with words that would spread through the supernatural community like wildfire. "You called me your mate," she whispered. "You are my mate." He stepped closer, his hands hovering near her face, like he was afraid she might break. "The other half of my soul, my queen, if you'll have me. "I'm mixed blood," she said, the words spilling out like a confession. "My grandmother was human. I can barely shift. I'm everything they said I was." "You're perfect." His fingers finally touched her cheek, catching a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "You're kind and intelligent and brave. You see people, really see them. You made me remember what it felt like to hope." "Adrian." "I've been alone for 34 years, Mara. I'd given up on finding my mate, given up on having someone to share my life with. And then I saw you in that restaurant, and everything changed. You changed everything." The golden thread in her chest blazed to life, responding to the conviction in his voice. She could feel it now, the bond between them, singing with recognition and longing and love so deep it took her breath away. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "So am I." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Terrified I'll lose you. Terrified you'll decide I'm too much, that this life is too much. Terrified that you'll run and I'll spend eternity regretting every moment I didn't fight for you. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know how to be anything but a king." He smiled, and it was soft and real and completely hers. "Maybe we can figure it out together." Something in her chest cracked open, letting in light she hadn't felt in years. This beautiful, powerful man was offering her everything: love, protection, a place to belong. All she had to do was be brave enough to take it. "What if I'm not ready?" she whispered. "Then I'll wait." He said it simply, like it was the easiest promise in the world. "However long it takes, however much patience you need, I'll wait." Mara looked into his eyes and saw her future. Not the small, careful life she planned, but something vast and terrifying and wonderful, a life where she mattered, where she was chosen, where she was enough. "I choose you," she said, the words barely audible. "I choose this. I choose us." His smile was blinding. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as he responded with a hunger that took her breath away. The bond between them flared to life, golden and warm and absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara could see her whole future reflected in his eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said, and she believed him. "My mate, my queen, my everything." The annual Harvest Moon Gathering was the most important social event in the supernatural community, where pack leaders and their families came together to honour old alliances and forge new ones. Mara had never attended before. Her family had made it clear she wasn't worthy of representing their bloodline. But tonight she stood beside Adrian in the grand ballroom of the royal estate, wearing a gown that cost more than her yearly salary and feeling like she was living someone else's life. "You're shaking," Adrian murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Everyone's staring," she whispered, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes tracking their every movement. Word had already spread about the Alpha King's mysterious mate, and the speculation was feeding a frenzy of curiosity and judgment. "Let them stare." His voice carried absolute confidence. "They're looking at their future queen." The title still didn't feel real. 3 weeks had passed since that day in the library, 3 weeks of Adrian patiently introducing her to his world while she struggled to believe she belonged in it. He'd been everything he'd promised: patient, gentle, protective, but Mara still felt like an imposter wearing borrowed finery. "Adrian." A commanding voice cut through the crowd, and Mara's stomach dropped as she recognised Lord Blackthorne approaching. He was old pack nobility, the kind of man who measured worth in bloodlines and breeding. "Blackthorne." Adrian's acknowledgement was polite but cool. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure," Blackthorne said, his calculating gaze sliding to Mara, "though I've heard interesting rumours." "Lady Mara," Adrian said formally. "My mate." The word carried across the immediate vicinity, like a stone dropped in still water, creating ripples of shocked whispers. Mara felt her cheeks burn as conversations stopped and heads turned. "Fascinating," Blackthorn said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "And what pack does Lady Mara represent?" The question was a trap, and they all knew it. Mara's mixed heritage meant she belonged to no pack, claimed by no one until Adrian had changed everything. "She represents mine," Adrian said quietly, but his voice carried the kind of authority that made the entire ballroom fall silent. "As my mate, she speaks for the crown." "Of course," Blackthorn said, though his eyes glittered with malice. "How progressive. Though I do wonder what her family thinks of this sudden elevation." As if summoned by the words, Mara's family materialized from the crowd. Her parents looked mortified, her uncle furious, and Rebecca. Rebecca looked like she was planning murder. Uncle Marcus," Adrian greeted Mara's uncle with frigid politeness. "I wasn't aware you'd be attending this year." "We wouldn't miss it," Marcus replied, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, "especially not when our family name is being discussed so publicly." "Your family name is about to become significantly more prestigious," Adrian said mildly. "Congratulations." "Is it?" Rebecca stepped forward, her face twisted with years of resentment finally given voice. "Because from where we stand, it looks like our bloodline is being used to legitimize a political alliance. Tell me, Your Majesty, what exactly are you getting out of this arrangement with our defective relative?" The word hung in the air like a slap. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, sensing drama, hungry for scandal. Mara felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller under the weight of their judgment. "Rebecca," Mara whispered, "please don't—" "Don't what? Don't tell the truth?" Rebecca's voice rose, carrying across the ballroom. "Don't mention that you can barely shift, that your blood is so diluted you're practically human. Don't point out that the only reason anyone is paying attention to you is because the king is having some sort of midlife crisis." "Enough." Adrian's voice cracked like thunder, and power rippled through the room in waves that made the crystal chandeliers chime. "You will not speak to my mate that way." "Your mate?" Rebecca laughed, the sound bitter and cruel. "She's a charity case, Your Majesty, a broken little half-breed you're using for whatever twisted game you're playing. But when you get bored, when you remember what you really need in a queen, you'll toss her aside like everyone else has." The words hit Mara like physical blows, each one finding the tender places in her heart where doubt lived. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe this was all some elaborate game, some political manoeuvring she was too naive to understand. "You're wrong," Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet, "about all of it." He stepped forward, and suddenly he wasn't just Adrian anymore. He was the Alpha King, ancient power flowing around him like a living thing, making the air itself bow to his will. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. "Mara is not my political alliance. She is not my charity case. She is not my game." Each word was precisely enunciated, carving truth into the silence. "She is my heart, my soul, the other half of everything I am." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Hundreds of supernatural beings holding their breath as their king laid his heart bare. "You call her broken, but she's the strongest person I've ever met. You call her blood-tainted, but she's purer than anyone in this room. You question her worth, but she's worth more than all of your precious bloodlines combined." His gaze swept the crowd, touching every face, every witness to this moment. Mara didn't seek power or position. She didn't chase after a crown or a throne. I found her, and I knew that I would spend my life protecting her, loving her, building a kingdom worthy of her goodness. He turned back to Rebecca, his smile sharp and dangerous. "So when you insult my mate, you insult me, and I don't recommend insulting your king." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone present. Around them, pack leaders were dropping their gazes. acknowledging the absolute authority in his words. Furthermore, Adrian continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room, let me be perfectly clear about something. Mara is not just my mate, she is your queen. She will rule beside me, guide our people with the compassion and wisdom that you so clearly lack. And anyone who treats her with anything less than the respect she deserves will find themselves explaining their behaviour to me, personally. He held out his hand to Mara, and she saw her future in his eyes. Not just love, but partnership. Not just protection, but belonging. A place at his side that was hers by right, by choice, by the bond that sang between them. My queen, he said softly, and this time the title felt real. Mara took his hand, feeling the bond flare to life between them, golden and warm and absolutely right. Around them, the ballroom erupted in movement, people bowing, acknowledging her new status, her place at the Alpha King's side. But all she could see was Adrian, looking at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted. I love you, she said, the words carrying across the hushed room. I love you too, he replied, and then he kissed her in front of everyone, sealing their bond with witnesses from every pack, every family, every corner of their world. When they broke apart, both breathless, Mara could see her whole future stretching ahead. Not the small, hidden life she'd planned, but something vast and bright and beautiful. She was chosen. She was claimed. She was home. Long live the Queen! Someone called from the crowd, and the ballroom erupted in cheers that echoed through the night like a promise, like a beginning. The weeks that followed were a strange, beautiful rhythm of mornings wrapped in silk sheets and evenings by the fire, of learning to walk in heels that cost more than her old apartment's rent, and discovering that being queen meant having the power to help people who'd been overlooked just as she had been. Mara woke each morning in Adrian's arms, still marvelling at the solid warmth of him, the way he held her like she was something precious. The nightmares about not belonging had faded, replaced by dreams of the future they were building together. Good morning, my queen, he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep and contentment. Good morning, my king, she replied, turning in his arms to meet his amber eyes. Even after 2 months, the sight of him first thing in the morning still stole her breath. Their days had settled into a pattern that felt like home. Adrian would bring her coffee in bed. He'd learned exactly how she liked it, with cream and honey, and they'd plan their day together. Royal duties in the morning, quiet time in the afternoon, evenings that belonged only to them. But it was the small moments that meant the most. The way he remembered that she loved old books and kept finding first editions for her private library. How he'd started learning to cook her favourite foods because he liked taking care of her. The patient way he taught her about pack politics and royal protocol, never making her feel stupid for not knowing things she'd never been expected to learn. The literacy programme proposal is ready for review, Mara said over breakfast, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. If approved, we can have reading centres in 12-pack territories by spring. Adrian's smile was proud and fond. You've been busy. I want to help people who feel like they don't have a voice, she said, her cheeks warming under his approving gaze. Children who think they don't matter because they're different. Like you did. Like I did. She met his eyes steadily. No child should grow up believing they're not enough. He reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb tracing the engagement ring he'd placed there just last week, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the morning light like captured stars. Have I told you today that I love you? He asked. Only twice, she replied, laughing, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you, Mara. I love your compassion, your intelligence, the way you see people others would overlook. I love that you're making our kingdom kinder, more just. You're exactly the queen our people need. The words still made her chest flutter with warmth and disbelief. Queen, her. The girl who'd been told she wasn't good enough for her own family was now planning policies and programs that would help thousands. Speaking of which, Adrian said, pulling an official-looking document from his briefcase, this came this morning. Mara read the letter with growing amazement. It was from the Council of Pack Leaders, formally recognising her initiatives and requesting her input on inter-pack cooperation policies. "They're asking for my opinion," she said, wonder in her voice. "They're asking for their Queen's guidance," Adrian corrected gently, "because you've proven yourself to be exactly what this kingdom needed, someone who leads with her heart." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Adrian's personal secretary entered with an apologetic expression. "Your Majesties, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's someone here to see Queen Mara. She says it's urgent." Mara frowned, setting down her coffee. "Who is it?" "Rebecca Thornfield, Your Majesty. She seems distressed." Adrian's expression hardened immediately. "If she's here to cause more trouble—" "Let her in," Mara said quietly. "I want to hear what she has to say." Rebecca entered the breakfast room, looking nothing like the polished, cruel woman who'd humiliated Mara at the Harvest Moon gathering. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup smudged, and her usual confidence had crumbled into something desperate. "Mara," she said, her voice small and broken, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Rebecca," Mara replied carefully, very aware of Adrian's protective tension beside her, "what do you want?" "To apologise, to beg your forgiveness." Rebecca's hands shook as she twisted them together. "I was wrong about everything. You're not broken or worthless or any of the terrible things I said. You're amazing. You're the Queen, and you've been kinder to people in 2 months than our family was to you in 25 years. "What's brought this on?" Adrian asked, his voice cool. "The literacy centres," Rebecca whispered. "My daughter, she's struggling in school. Reading is hard for her, and I didn't know what to do. When I heard about the Queen's programme, about how it was specifically designed for children who learn differently—" She looked up at Mara with tears in her eyes. "You could have excluded families like ours. You could have made it clear that people who hurt you wouldn't be welcome. But you didn't. Your programme helped my little girl, and I realised what I'd lost, what I'd thrown away." Mara felt something shift in her chest, the last piece of old pain dissolving into something that felt remarkably like peace. "I can't take back what I did to you," Rebecca continued. "I can't undo the years of cruelty, the way I made you feel small and unwanted. But I needed you to know you were never the problem. You were never broken. I was broken. I was so jealous of your goodness, your strength, that I tried to convince you that you were the weak one. Rebecca, you found your mate. You found someone who sees your worth. You became a queen, and you're using that power to help people." Rebecca's voice broke completely. "You became everything you were always meant to be, and I lost a sister. I lost the chance to know the most remarkable woman I've ever met." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and years too late. But looking at her sister's tear-stained face, Mara found she wasn't angry anymore. The hurt was still there, probably always would be, but it no longer defined her. "I forgive you," she said quietly. Rebecca's sob of relief filled the room. Thank you, Your Majesty." "Just Mara," she said gently. "When it's just us, just call me Mara." After Rebecca left, still crying, but with something like hope in her face, Adrian pulled Mara into his arms. "That was incredibly generous of you," he said. "She's still my sister, and holding on to anger was hurting me more than her." Mara leaned into his warmth, marvelling at how safe she felt, how completely she belonged in his arms. "Besides, I have everything I ever wanted. It's easy to forgive when you're this happy." "Are you?" he asked, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "Happy?" "Impossibly happy," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I love you, Adrian. I love our life, our kingdom, the future we're building together. You saved me." "You saved me right back," he murmured against her lips. "I was just existing before you. Now I'm living." They stood there in the morning light, holding each other, and Mara marvelled at the journey that had brought her here. from that humiliating night in the restaurant to this moment of perfect belonging. She was loved, she was chosen, she was home. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire in their private sitting room, Adrian reading policy reports while Mara worked on her literacy program expansion, she caught him watching her with that expression that still made her heart skip. "What?" she asked, laughing. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he said. "How perfectly you fit into my life, into my heart." "I was thinking the same thing," she admitted. "A year ago, I thought I was destined to be alone, to always be on the outside looking in. Now you're the centre of everything that matters to me." Mara set down her papers and moved to curl up beside him on the sofa, tucking herself against his side where she fit like she'd been made for that exact spot. "I love you," she said, the words coming as easily as breathing now. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "My queen, my mate, my everything." Outside their window, snow began to fall, blanketing the kingdom in pristine white. But inside their sanctuary, surrounded by warmth and love and the promise of forever, Mara had never felt more at peace. She was home. She was loved. She was enough. She was exactly who she was meant to be. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Mara and Adrian's love story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of finding worth and belonging, please subscribe. It's free and helps more people discover these stories of love conquering all.